I told Andrew I was wiping my eyes when I first saw it after the movie. So I think for me, particularly as my husband and I raised twins with a lesbian couple who live next door. I feel like you made this movie for me. So thank you for that. Yeah, it's really incredibly moving, and it's really interesting to see, knowing the original film, how the film changed and how times have changed, and I want to just hear a little bit about your own relationship to the original film and when you first saw it.
So I saw the film when I was 8 years old. My mom saw the VHS for Ang Lee's The Wedding Banquet at a video rental store, and she said, "Oh, this is that movie with Asian people that white people are watching. We should see what it's about." And so rented it not knowing that it was queer, and so we watched it as a family, kind of awkwardly. And as a nascent gay boy, it kind of blew my mind, and in retrospect, I realized that was the first gay film I'd ever seen. And the fact that it was a gay and Asian film, and a film that's told with so much humanity, I think it really put me on the right path, as a person and as a filmmaker. And so it feels very kind of full circle, to make this film.
And what does it mean to make this film for you now? Meaning, like, not in relationship to the old one, but actually just making this kind of work, and this queer work, and this Asian work, and this, I would imagine, very personal work.
Yeah, I think the way that I could make the film, with any sort of confidence and authenticity, was to find kind of how to make it personal. And for me, there's something about, how much has changed since 1993 for queer people, and, thinking about how, now gay people can get married, and that was a question that, my boyfriend and I continue to talk about, right? And so there's something about that conversation that made its way into the film. And then, the conversation about having children, one of the first times Sean and I talked about it, having kids, he said, if it happens, it happens, which is a line in the movie. And I said to him, no, it doesn't for gay people. Like, you can't whoopsie daisy a baby. And it was in that moment that I realized that, as gay people, we have to be incredibly intentional about having children. And so any sort of hesitation, which is such a natural thing, could become a giant obstacle. And for me, how tragic that could be if it stops people from becoming parents, because queer people are such wonderful caretakers. And so that was something that I wanted to explore in this. And so using kind of marriage and children as these kind of creative North Stars to help guide this film so that it felt, kind of authentic to me.
This film and your previous film, Fire Island, are both screwball comedies, right? This one is specifically a remarriage comedy, right? Like a couple that gets together, is together, breaks up in the film, and then both couples end up back together again at the end. I'm wondering, what does screwball mean to you? And and what's it like to be making one after the other in this moment?
I mean, I think farce is so helpful, to kind of show how absurd our lives actually can be, and to kind of exaggerate it and blow it up so that you can emphasize, the emotions and the drama of it. I think for me also, I love a film that kind of derives its conflict from kind of characters who love each other too much, as opposed to any sort of villainy. That's more interesting to me. And I think that manifests in in Screwball and antics in a way, but it's such a tricky and interesting balance, James Shamus, my co-writer and producer, he was the one that in this development process for the screenplay was Min's grandmother knows, and like let's kind of subvert the expectation of like we have to hide this from grandma for the entire movie and just have her be like, you're gay, you know. And so there was so much fun to be had with kind of like.
Do you remember when he came up with that change? Because it is the surprising turn of events, I think, for the audience, but also for people who know the original.
Yeah, it's pretty early. It was pretty early in the process, you know, and I think it had to do with, you know, it was a very character-derived choice, you know, that like we just felt this woman would be too smart, you know, like why would she be that kind of, you know, dense, you know, and so there was a real, you know, I think there's something about this film where of course you have the plot and the antics, but then there's also just the kind of humanity of the characters and the texture of the relationships and the intimacy, and that was all kind of, you know, wanting to give these characters as much humanity as possible so that they felt like a real family that you would want to be a part of by the end of the movie.
Right. Let's talk about the grandmother. It's really, she's incredible in the film. I mean, it's really from the first second she's on the video, you're just like, who is that person? Who is that actress? Yeah. Really, can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, you know, interestingly, Min's grandmother was initially written as Min's mother. And we were talking with our casting director, Jenny Ju, about who we could cast, and, you know, kind of both came to this, like, insight for, you know, Yuh-jung, who I guess most famously in the US is in the film Minari, for which she won her Oscar. And, you know, we set up a conversation and she was very kind of humble about it. And she said, I feel a little old playing, you know, the mother of this character, but what about grandmother? And I could see in that conversation just like such a spark, you know, that like, that kind of actor's inspiration and excitement, and you know, it was very, you know, kind of inspiring for me, you know. But yeah, you know, she's, you know, a legend, and I remember we our very first scene together, the very first take. I went up to her and I said, "That was lovely. Can we go again?" And she stopped me and she was like, if it was truly lovely, we wouldn't have to go again. And I got kind of caught, and she said, you know, like American directors, they're so nice. Like you don't have to be nice. Just like give me the note. It's fine. And so there was a real kind of directness that was really great, and you know, and actually like that scene where she, you know, like reconciles like with her grandson. She was very honest with me, like in our first conversation. She was like, that scene isn't written well enough. Like, you can do better. It was very grandmotherly. Like, she was like, you could do better. And it was kind of through our conversations and then actually through the artist that we worked with, Julia Kwan, who is Min's artwork. She made it. And then also an insight from my cinematographer, who is Korean from Korea, you know, kind of pulling that all together to create that scene about, you know, his artwork and chosen family, and you know, it's one of my favorite scenes in the film now.
You and I met when you were making Spa Night, your first film, which was, you know, beautiful work, very different kind of work. You also have been sort of balancing between a certain kind of independent cinema and then a cinema that is involved with a more traditional Hollywood, but also still not Hollywood. I mean, I just want to, like, I guess we've known each other for probably a decade now. And I'm curious, what's it feel like as you're making these films and as you're sort of navigating those differences?
Yeah, it's hard, right? I remember, I think our first conversation, you know, you had told me about the uneasy balance between art and commerce in film, and I think as I've grown in the industry, I feel that even more, you know, more and more with each project, because film is such an expensive medium, right? That to ignore the business of it is to kind of be naive. You know, you have to know how you can get these things made, how you can get the resources to make these films. And so, you know, I've been trying to figure out how I can, you know, grow as a filmmaker, grow in my career, like gain more resources, honestly, like pay the people that I work with, right, a livable wage, and still tell stories that feel meaningful to me. And, you know, as a gay Asian American, it's not always clear. And I think about how when I made Spawn, I remember talking to the director Mariel Heller about how, like, I was like, I don't know if I can make a career of making gay and Asian films. Like, I just don't know how I make a living that way. And she was so incredibly, like, such a great cheerleader. And she's like, I believe in you and I think you can do it. And I've kind of, you know, 3 films after that, I've kind of done it. And I will say that it feels like, not to get kind of sad now, but like I feel like I'm riding a bit of a wave, you know, and that if I came a little bit earlier, it would have been hard. And honestly, I'm a little bit scared that if you come after, it might be hard, right? And so there's a part of me that's like, yeah, like I'm just gonna keep riding this wave, you know, keep working with Bo and Yang, and, you know.
But you're doing it very beautifully and honestly, and with a lot of heart and also a lot of craft. So it's very impressive.
Yeah.
We have time for like 2 or 3 questions if you have audience. Yes.
How did you approach the scenes where, like, some of the characters were speaking a language that they knew, but the other characters in them weren't? But you know the audience would be able to understand it. Like, did you approach that differently?
Just quickly, I'm going to repeat the question. How did you approach shooting with people? Some people understood one language, some people understood another, trying to bring these things together.
Yeah, you know, I think it was helpful to lean into the reality of the situation sometimes, where it's just like, yeah, if Kelly Marie Tran doesn't understand Yuh-jung and Han Gi-chan speaking Korean, like, that's great, actually, you know, just the facial reactions and you know, the confusion. You know, they obviously had the script, and so they, you know, every actor did know, you know, what was happening in the scene, and we could always give that context, you know, kind of in the rehearsal process. But you know, I think it was about kind of letting them feel the confusion and embracing that.
Other questions? Yes.
I imagine it seems like the your co-writer was one of the screenwriters for the original, and that seems like a very unique experience. Did that come up in the process of adapting the original film, or?
So the question is about working with James Schamus, who was one of the original writers and also the co-writer. So a big gap in what it was like to work with the person who started with this material.
Yeah, you know, I had worked with James and our other producer, Joe Pirro, on my second feature, Driveways, and so we already did have some, like, kind of experience talking about story, and, you know, like, I'm so thankful for kind of the continued legacy, you know, and James is incredibly, like, kind of aware of his role as, you know, like an ally, right? Like, it's actually very funny, like, the Ally Award that Joan Chen's character gets at the beginning is kind of inspired by, there's a James Schamus Outfest Ally Award. It's so, like, it's a little bit making fun of him, you know. But, you know, like, I think the film, I had never written a film that was balancing so many different storylines, and you know, James is an incredible craftsman, you know, and really understood the architecture of, you know, kind of how to tell this, you know, multiple character perspective story. And so, you know, like, there's so much kind of insight and so much just experience that I was just trying to absorb as much as possible. And then also just, like, make sure that I was staying true to, like, it's such a millennial film, and I just had to kind of like understand that and believe in that. And so, like it was a real.
I don't even know what millennial means.
But yes, it was just like trying to, just like kind of like bring the best of what we could offer, and kind of merge that into the film.
Yes.
Hi.
You made me cry, you made me laugh, you made me all the things.
Cool.
That last scene with Angela and Lee where she finds her in the garden, what was your, because, they're not saying anything, but so much is being said. What was the writing and directing process like for you to arrive at that moment and trust your actors to like fill in the gaps in that silence? And how did you communicate that moment?
The question was about the scene at the end between Angela and Lee, and which has almost no dialogue. And what was it like to direct the actors in that scene?
Yeah. So interestingly, the first the screenplay that we went into pre-production with, that scene did not take place in the garden. That scene took place in City Hall. And so, as Chris and Min are getting married, Angela kind of slips out to let them have their moment, and she sees Lee walk in, and they exchange some words, and we were location scouting, and we couldn't find a space that felt special enough, and I had a conversation with Kelly and Lily, and Kelly had a question about one of the lines of dialogue, and I was like, yeah, maybe that's not quite authentic, maybe it's not quite working, and kind of those two kind of discoveries through the pre-production process like led me and James to think about, well, maybe the moment's different then. Like if we're having a hard time with this, what should be such a special moment, maybe it's not right. And then we thought about the garden and home, and it just felt more appropriate that they see each other at home. And then in terms of kind of the dialogue, it's like, well, what if they just got to witness each other? Like what if they just got to see each other? And so it just, it was one of those kind of trust the process discoveries where it's, if you can go through the filmmaking process with an open heart and understand why something is or isn't working, it'll lead you to like an organic answer. And I love that moment. And working with the actors, Lily and Kelly really understood that moment. And after one of the takes, I was like crying and I yelled cut with like a warbly voice, and Lily Gladstone was like, "Are you crying again?" I was like, "Yes, I'm sorry, this is so moving," But yeah, like I'm so thankful for the collaborations, like people being really honest about like this location doesn't feel right, or like, hey, I have a question about this, like line. Like if it wasn't for, that kind of feedback, like we wouldn't have had, a really magical moment.
I want to say that for me, this night is, as I said, we've known each other for a while, but we actually met through the Sundance Institute, and I was a mentor for Andrew. And the fact that we're here tonight, like 3 or 4 films later, that you speak with such knowledge and wisdom, and also films behind you, like you're doing it, and that you're now a mentor for Queer Art, which was the organization founded really from Sundance as an inspiration of what people can do as a community to carry on people who know what millennial means and people who don't. These are the transitions, and these are the generations. So it's really wonderful to be here with you and with this film tonight.
Thank you.
And one of the long traditions of Queer Art is that after an event like this, we invite everyone to join us at Julius, which is the oldest gay bar in New York City, one of the oldest gay bars in the country. It's on the corner of West 10th and Waverly. And I know that because I said it once a month for 10 years. So we both look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for Bleecker Street and the Quad for hosting this event, and thank you for Andrew for this movie.
Thank you, everyone.